You're listening to the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.
We're in the 6th chapter of Nazir, and the chapter began. Let's just cast our minds back to where the chapter began. The first Mishnah, Shlosha minim asurim ba Nazir. There are 3 things which are forbidden to a Nazir. Uncleanness, contact with a dead body, shaving, and grape products. So that's how the chapter begins. And we defined the quantities of grape product allowed. We defined the time intervals allowed. We define what happens if someone repeatedly comes into contact with a dead body or repeatedly shaves. And now we're going to circle back in a discussion which is quite reminiscent of the Gemara. It's quite a Talmudic discussion as to which prohibition is most important. So we've listed the 3, and now we're going to get into a rather philosophical distinction about their relative priority. And so we're jumping into the 5th Mishnah now. And the 5th Mishnah, is going to begin in exactly the same way as the beginning of the chapter. Shlosha minim asurim ba Nazir. There are 3 things which are forbidden to a Nazir. Let's jump into the 5th Mishnah. Shlosha minim asurim ba Nazir. 3 things are forbidden to a Nazir. Hatuma ve'hatiglachat ve'hayotze min hagafen. The uncleanness, shaving, and grape products. That, exactly as we had at the beginning of the chapter. This is why I'm saying this Mishnah feels a little bit like Gemara. That's the style of the Gemara, that we quote a Mishnah and then we start talking about what it means. So it's completely normal for Gemara, but slightly unusual for Mishnah. And now we're going to go through, again, in a very Gemara-like way, we're going to go through a whole set of possible priorities. And we'll see, by the way, that they're all more important than each other in different ways, but there's no single answer. There's no clean, simple answer to this question. They're all important in different ways. And usually in these sugyot, in these conversations in the Gemara, we learn particular things about each prohibition. So in other words, the point of the discussion is the point of the discussion usually lies in the side issues that come out, not in the direct answer to the question. And again, here we'll see that issues come out of the discussion that we might not be expecting. Let's carry on in the Mishnah. Chomer batuma uva tiglachat. The mi bayotse mina gefen. The uncleanliness and shaving is chomer, is more stringent than grape products. Because defilement and shaving cancel, whereas grape products don't cancel. What does that mean? Well, if you drink grape products or eat grape products when you're a Nazir, you're liable to lashes, but it doesn't cancel out the days you've kept. Whereas if you shave, we've already learned that if you shave, or let's say some bandits kidnap you and force you to shave or shave you, you need to restart the count. You need to count at least 30 days. So the shaving, if you like, cancels out anything you've already done. And we learn in one of the early chapters that if you come into contact with a dead body, and then, by the way, you have to shave and bring your purification sacrifices, at that point, your Nazirut, your Nazir period, goes right the way back to the beginning. So you lose everything. They cancel out everything. So to that extent, they're more stringent. But of course, there's always another. The Gemara always has another example, and let's get the second example. Chomer bayotse min hagefen umi batuma uvatiglachat. Chomer bayotse min hagefen mi batuma uvatiglachat. Grape products have a stringency that uncleanliness or shaving don't have. And the text is slightly confused here, by the way, and there's crossings out in the manuscript. I've tried to make sense of the text as best as I can. Essentially, what the Mishnah is saying is that there's some way in which grapes are more stringent, and the Mishnah will now explain shelo hutar bichlal hayotze min hagefen shelo hutar bichlal hayotze min hagefen, because the grape products are never released from this general rule. So there's no exception to the grape rule. If you're a Nazir, there are absolutely no situations when you can drink grape or eat grape. But we'll discover that there are some legal exceptions to the prohibitions on coming into contact with a dead body or shaving. And the Mishnah will enumerate them. Vehatuma vehatiglachat, the uncleanness and shaving were released from their general rules. Where so? But tiglachat mitzvah, sometimes there's a mitzvah to shave. If you're afflicted with mutzurah, with leprosy, or with this skin disease, it may not be leprosy, we don't quite know what it is, but if you're afflicted with tzaraat, then you shave at the end of your period of being kind of locked up. You have to shave completely, by the way, right down to the eyebrows. We'll see the psukim in a minute. So if you're afflicted with this disease, you have to shave at the end, and then you bring your sacrifices. So what about coming into contact with a corpse? Well, there's also, there is a situation when you are obligated to come into contact with a corpse. If you're walking along the road and you see an abandoned corpse, it's called a mate mitzvah. If you see an abandoned corpse, you have to bury it. We are supposed to stop anything else that we're doing. All other mitzvot are basically suspended until we can find a proper burial for this corpse. Everything is suspended. And by the way, Nazirut is suspended as well. So a Nazir is walking along the road. He sees an abandoned corpse. His obligation is to bury that corpse, even though he's commanded not to come into contact with dead bodies. So to a certain extent, grape products are more stringent because there's no let out. Now, the final example, and we're going to go circling back now with the tzarat, we're going to circle back to the leprosy. Chomer bat tuma mi bat tiglachat. Uncleanness is more stringent than shaving. Shiatuma soteret hakol, because uncleanness actually cancels out everything. If you have to shave yourself, if you become unclean, and then you're purified on the third and the seventh day, and then you bring your sacrifices on the eighth day, that cancels out the whole of your period of Nazirut. Uncleanness cancels everything and requires a sacrifice. Because shaving only cancels out 30 days. If you get shaved, you only have to make up 30 days. And by the way, you don't have to bring a special sacrifice. If bandits kidnap you and shave you in the middle of your Nazirut period, you have to make up 30 days, but you don't have to bring a sacrifice. So to that extent, uncleanness is more stringent. And the Mishnah is now going to go back and explore a little bit the difference between the shaving that you do at the end of your Nazir period and the shaving that you do if you have leprosy. And the verses are in Leviticus, and they're very specific about the fact that you bathe and you bathe in water, you become clean, you remain outside your tent 7 days. On the seventh day, you do a complete shaving, hair, beard, eyebrows. You bathe again. On the eighth day, you take your sacrifices and you bring them to the Beit Mikdash. That's the routine if you've got leprosy. So now let's come back to the Mishnah. How does shaving for uncleanness work? Okay, so let's just keep the leprosy in the back of our heads. How does shaving for uncleanness work? If you come into contact with a dead body, well, you're sprinkled with the water that's mixed with the ashes of the red heifer on the third and the seventh day. That's the routine described in Parshat Hukat, in Bamidbar. And the Mishnah is going to remind us, he'd sprinkle on the third and the seventh day. And then he'd shave on the seventh day. The verses there are explicit that he'd shave on the seventh day. And he'd bring his sacrifices on the eighth day. If he shaved on the eighth day, if he actually he's sprinkled on the seventh day, if he didn't shave until the eighth day, he can bring his sacrifices that day. He can do that. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon said, Ma bein zeh li mitzurah. What difference is there between this one and a person with mitzurah, someone with sarat? Because we've seen the person with sarat also shaves on the seventh day and bathes and brings sacrifices on the eighth day. Amarlo, he said to him, Rabbi Akiva is now talking to Rabbi Tarfon. So we're in a first century conversation. Amarlo, he said, the purification of this one depends on his days. In other words, if you come into contact with a dead body, then at the end of 7 days, presumably you've had the sprinkling. At the end of 7 days, you're pure. As far as the person with leprosy or tzara'at, whatever this disease is, the purification is actually dependent on his shaving. And the purification actually depends on the shaving. And he can't actually bring a sacrifice until the next day, until the sun has actually set on the seventh day.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Daily Mishnah Podcast with Benedict.